I am not 5 anymore. I am the age that I am. And because we do regress in some ways. It does feel like we're 13 again and we're so irritated with our parents. How can I be like, I am 34 years old. I can take a deep breath. I can respond as a 34-year-old would.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This is a space where you belong, not because you earned it, not because of your title, your paycheck, or number of kids you have, but just because you are human and you are good. Here we explore progress over perfection, emotional and spiritual wellness, and how to relish the good parts of life that coexist with the not so good parts. This is Happiness in Progress. Happy holidays. And just in time for the holidays, we are going to be talking about setting boundaries with family, especially with these holiday get-togethers with our family members that can be very triggering. And so we're going to talk about how to identify those triggers, how to set boundaries, even when it's hard, even when the family thinks you're dramatic. We're also going to talk about giving grace to your parents and everything in between. This is a really informative podcast episode I'm so excited to share with you. Today, you get to hear from Jordan Pickell. She is a trauma and relationship therapist. She helps people use self-discovery and boundaries to disrupt generational patterns. She has a holiday boundaries workshop. We're going to talk a lot about setting those boundaries in this conversation. So let's get to it. Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about boundaries, especially during the holiday season, because being with family can be so challenging. And it's interesting because we love our family so much, but why can being with them be so challenging?
I've heard it said before that our family pushes our buttons like no one else, and it's because they installed them. There's something about being with family that brings you back into being a teenager or being a kid where you don't necessarily, you're maybe more dysregulated, your emotions come up, and there can be a feeling less a sense of power that if you're, for example, if you're the youngest, then they sort of still treat you like the baby.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This idea that they installed the buttons, that totally makes sense. I feel that reverting to how you were treated when you lived in the home versus all of the growth that you've had as an adult, everything that goes on in your life, it's so much different. So what needs to happen mentally before you walk into that space? How can you prepare yourself for, I'm the oldest. So
Me too.
I've got like the oldest daughter syndrome. Before you walk back into that space, that you're walking into a space that maybe there's a lot of people there that haven't let you change or haven't let you evolve.
Great. Well, usually the folks that I'm working with are in therapy. So if we're going way back, so people are in therapy, they know maybe a little bit about the triggers that come up when they're with their families. So that, okay, maybe this person will say this, or I'm going to start taking responsibility and making sure everyone's okay. That way we can problem solve about, okay, how do we create a plan about what might come up? And then thinking about what can we put into place beforehand. Maybe there are some conversations that you want to have with some family members of, hey, when I come, these are the expectations I have, so that when you do start interacting with people, you can kind of rely on those things. And some people are just gonna, they follow the guideline because you spoke it so openly. And when you aren't triggered, you're like grounded, hey, really smooth and casual, being able to have that conversation. And then having those maybe phrases in your back pocket. That's what I always tell people about. Okay, you think that this thing will come up. They'll talk about, I don't know, that why haven't you had a baby yet? Then you can have your response at the ready so that, it feels like, hey, I am grounded. I just use my voice. I don't have to feel frozen. I can access my words and say this one little phrase. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to take care of what the fallout will be because I've already thought that through.
Yeah, I like that there's a lot of intentionality to this, that you've done this work beforehand. Um, as you're doing this and you have these conversations beforehand, are there any things that you should be aware of? Because even that first initial conversation of, "Hey, I'm coming for Christmas and I don't want to talk about XYZ," even that can be a triggering conversation.
Yeah, well, I think thinking about what the response will be, and the difficult part is that some people really resent the fact that they have to be strategic in having these conversations. And so I do sometimes say, hey, when you're first starting setting boundaries, you're often much more harsh and less empathic for how the other person might be receiving it
Mhm.
because you're, having to be so strong and, do your power pose so that you can actually get the words out. So having some compassion about it maybe being a little bit harsh the first time that you do it.
Mhm.
But let's say you've had some experiences doing boundary setting, and so this is just another conversation that you're having that you can anticipate how they might respond. This is a conversation that they won't find surprising necessarily. They might be really frustrated, might be like, okay, you're still on this thing.
Mm.
So being able to think about, okay, they're gonna feel really hurt. They're gonna get angry. And how can I either have an exit plan of like, I don't explain myself. I'm going to say the thing and then get out. It is there a way that I can couch it in, I understand you feel this, that you might feel this way, and I'm able to, maybe I can't do this thing. We're not going to stay at your house for the weekend, but we're going to be
Yeah.
nearby and we're going to have breakfast and lunch and dinner with you. And that it can be a little bit of a, maybe not a negotiation, but you're thinking about how it can be, how it will be received, and being able to show care, even if it's like, I can't do this, but I can do this instead.
Yeah, and that can be a little hard to show that empathy, especially like you mentioned that first time, because you're the one that's trying to set boundaries, and it can be hard to be empathetic toward the other person in that conversation if it feels like there's some like element of control.
Exactly. And that's where, when you're talking to someone like that, that's where we're really paring it down. And it really is like, you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to share your empathy with the person. And you don't need to, or maybe you say it, but you don't necessarily feel it. That
Mm.
you don't, in my opinion, you don't owe people those pieces. But if we're wanting to have a longer relationship, that is one thing that we're doing to care for the relationship.
Yeah, right. This reminds me of something you wrote on Instagram, and I really loved this. It says, quote, "When you begin setting boundaries, some relationships will fall apart because disregarding yourself is what holds it together. When we are beginning the work of asserting our boundaries, initially we might swing from prioritizing other people's needs to disregarding them. The strongest relationships are ones in which both people's needs exist side by side, finding flexibility and balance in giving, receiving, and asking for support." End quote. I love that because I mean, we're both oldest daughters, and I think it's very easy to put everyone's needs before our own, and so that's a very big shift, but if there's someone listening who, um, identifies with that, they're always trying to make sure everyone's happy, putting everyone's needs before their own, what would you say to them about why their needs are important to listen to?
I mean, you've probably heard the metaphor of the putting on your mask first. So there is something about showing up for other people. You need to be able to show up for yourself so that you're not getting burnt out. Let's say that you do want to continue showing up. That being said, I don't always think that the reason to take care of ourselves is so that we can better take care of other people. I think that
Mm,
we have worth without outside of the ways in which we care for other people. So, in my opinion, caring for your own needs is just an affirmation of, hey, I'm a whole human person who deserves dignity and respect and time and capacity. And in order to do that, I need to also have my own, prioritize my own needs.
I have never heard that. I love that you can put on the mask solely because it will keep you alive.
Right. Yes,
Not so you
exactly.
can move on to save everybody else.
That's exactly
Wow.
right.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Um, if you're going through this, you're preparing for triggers, you're preparing for some conversations that are uncomfortable, um, and how to not have to participate in these conversations, how to not have to be questioned about all the things in your life. Um, is there a point where you might decide not to go? What is that decision making process look like?
If I'm in therapy with someone, we talk through maybe what it's been like in the past, and maybe there's been conflict. So there's maybe the outward, okay, what is it actually going to be like? And then there's the feelings, getting down into the feelings. If it is a full body no, being able to uncover, I might be talking with someone and they're like, I need to go for this reason. My mom's going to be super upset. I need to make sure that my siblings aren't fighting. How is dinner even going to get on the table because no one helps? Those pieces. But if I think about, as the therapist, sifting through those maybe reasons, how are you actually feeling? And sometimes the feeling is, I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to subject myself to that. It just becomes very clear through conversation. So some of it's like very clear, I don't want to be abused. It's an abusive situation. And I'm cut off from myself, from my own feelings. And then other times it's bottom up. Let's explore your feelings. And maybe through that exploration, it's clear that this is not the place or time for you. It doesn't have to mean something in the long term. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to go. But listening to the body in what it's saying, that sometimes it's a very clear, I don't want to go.
I think that I can see someone in that situation, saying, I'm not going to go this time. And then the family, being in an uproar over drama caused. How is there the ability to honor yourself? And well, maybe it is that everyone feels that there's drama and you just have to let it be.
Well, that's the trap, right? Is that if we are so involved in managing other people's emotional needs, then setting the boundary, knowing that there's going to be a fallout, all of a sudden we have this sense of obligation to fix the fallout.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we step back from it's not my responsibility to manage their disappointment, their maybe anger about this thing? Yes, I can maybe provide empathy if that feels okay enough for me, but that's not their feelings, are not for me to manage.
Mm-hmm. That's hard. That is a hard
I
step of taking
know.
that,
Yeah,
of setting the boundary.
yeah, it's like years and years of work. And that's where I think we get to that place when we have practice setting boundaries over time, where it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm able to say, hey, I actually don't want to go to that restaurant. I want to go to this restaurant. Or, hey, I actually have to leave at 6:30 to go, have my bedtime routine. I want to say goodnight to the kids before they fall asleep. And those smaller boundaries make it easier to set the bigger ones and then be able to tolerate when somebody's disappointed.
Yeah, I love that idea of starting small. You probably build that muscle a little bit.
For sure.
So, okay, we talked about beforehand. We talked about maybe making the decision not to go. So let's talk about being there. You've decided to go. You've
Mm-hmm.
called ahead and said, "Hey, mom, I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to talk
Yes, exactly.
religion. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about my life choices." Those are some of the big, triggers that will come up. But it comes up anyway. How can you? What's the response look like? How can you respond in that moment to kind of protect yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I always talk through with folks sort of a plan for the gathering, right? So it is the front-loaded boundaries. It's having those phrases in your back pocket. Okay, we know that Uncle so and so is going to bring up politics. And then, when I speak back, this is probably what they're going to say in response. So knowing those things, having those responses in my back pocket, and then getting really grounded. So what I need to do, I have my plan that helps. Knowing, okay, I can go to the bathroom if I need a breath. I can maybe center myself before even walking into the door. I have my, I don't know, fidget or my stone in my pocket that helps ground me. I can splash water on my face. I can help with the kids or help with food prep and kind of leave that conversation without having to address it. So that's the other thing is we're constantly making the calculation, is this worth speaking back about, or is this something that I just leave the situation, which is also a completely understandable response and a boundary.
Yeah.
That is one way that we set boundaries. It's like it's nonverbal. Leave. I leave the
Yeah.
room. I go talk to somebody else.
And I love the permission to be able to do that. It's not causing drama by not talking about the thing you said you weren't going to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's the other person that's being rude, not you.
Yeah. Let's go back to phrases. What are some of the phrases that people can use to deal with these conversations head on that they can
Hmm.
have in their back pocket?
Yeah. So thinking about maybe what the thing is. So sometimes it's inappropriate questions or um, criticizing comments. And so sometimes it's things like, okay, I'm okay with my life choices, period. I'm okay with the way my body looks. I Sometimes it's just narrating. Yes, I have a full plate of food. You're
Hmm.
commenting on yes, I have a whole plate of food. I'm turning and changing the subject. It can be as confrontational of as that's racist,
Yeah.
period. It can be as soft as, just a subject change or, kind of what's something else? I understand that you're worried about that. And I'm not. That also feels harsh, doesn't it? What could be what are softer back in the pocket
I kind
phrases?
of liked that one.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like, that's a rude question,
Right.
and then not
Right.
answering it. But there
Yeah.
are soft ways about being like, oh, I'm not talking about that today.
Yeah.
That's also completely fine. Uncomfortable.
Right.
The person is so used to maybe asking or saying the rude thing and then you capitulating. So it might cause like a jarred reaction. But if you actually look at the words,
Yeah.
it's not that confrontational.
Yeah. Right. Um, I like that if you don't feel comfortable saying that, or if you're or maybe if the family's baiting you a little bit so that you have some kind of an
Mm,
emotional response or that you have a response at all, even though the words are very mellow, they're, very soft. Uh
hmm.
it's just easier to say, I'm gonna run to the bathroom. I'm gonna go check on the
Yeah.
kids. Let me
Yeah.
help with the pie. Yeah.
Hmm.
I
And yeah, sometimes also before you walk in, I help people with it and maybe a mental image, kind of a visualization of a barrier, right? So they are going to come at me with these questions or with these comments, these criticisms, and I can imagine myself in a bubble. I can imagine having a shield. I can just have this kind of shell between myself and whatever's going to come at me so
Mhm.
that I'm less affected because some of us are really affected by other people's emotions.
Yeah.
They feel disappointed and we feel it too, or they feel
Mhm.
disappointed and we feel deep guilt. So how can we separate their feelings are different than mine? Just because they're upset about something doesn't mean I have to be.
Mhm. Yeah. And this, I think, also goes to the grounding. So let's talk about some of the grounding things you can do. The visualization, you talked about having a stone in your pocket.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so for some folks, there are sensory ways of soothing ourselves. So it might be wearing your coziest sweater
Mhm.
when you go in. It might be having, for some people, they just have like a fidget or something or sometimes it could be a wedding ring. Like
Yeah.
being able to touch into the wedding ring to go, okay, remembering my priorities, maybe remembering what my intentions for this gathering are, what is important to me. And sometimes having that, it's like a literal touchstone of,
Mm.
okay, this is my reminder. Some people, they might write on a piece of paper, okay, just presence
Mm.
or strength or um, just a sense of just showing up. Whatever it is that feels respect. It could be so many different things that people have that they can return to, whether it's their intention or an affirmation of, I am strong, I can deal with this, folding up that piece of paper and then keep it in their pocket. And maybe they look at it in the bathroom when they take those breaks, or
Yeah.
maybe it's just knowing, being able to fiddle it with it in your pocket and knowing, oh, yes, that's what I'm here for, or that's what my intention is, or that's what's true about myself.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Holding on to what's true about yourself is probably not the same as when you were a 5-year-old sibling in the family.
Yes.
You're a totally different person now, and being able to hold that space for, um, yourself and who you are today, even if the people around you aren't doing that.
That's a really good point. I think people can get really hard on themselves for like, oh no, I regressed. I did so much therapy, so much work. I felt like, oh, I'm going in such a strong person this time, only
Yeah.
for that to completely dissolve, completely fall apart the minute you walk through the door. But I think, yeah, so self-compassion, it's okay that that happens. That happens to all of us in some ways. And can I remind myself, one another thing I can do to ground myself is I am X years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am not 5 anymore. I am the age that I am. And that, even that, because we do regress in some ways. It does
Mhm.
feel like we're 13 again and we're so irritated with our parents. How can I be like, I am 34 years old. I can take a deep breath. I can respond as a 34-year-old would.
Mm. It takes me back to, like you go back in there and suddenly you're in this really like a fight with your parents that you wouldn't have been in, except for when you were 13, you were, because you couldn't understand why you couldn't see the movie or date the boy or whatever it was. That's so
Mm-hmm.
funny how that does really come back, and it does feel like we've regressed in those situations.
And that's the tough part is sometimes the parent isn't even doing anything. It's just them being
Yeah.
them. It's
Right,
like
right.
that look that you did or the way that you dismissed that so quickly.
Interesting.
Like if somebody else did it, it would be like, yeah, people sometimes aren't the most attuned, kind people. But when my parent does it, it just like brings up this immediate irritation in a way that it doesn't with other people.
Is there something we can do to maybe soften around that?
Hmm. I think a lot of it is you might have seen this meme. Maybe I'm just so chronically online, but just like, oh, my mom's just a girl. They're just a human too.
Yeah. Mhm.
And being able to remember that, oh, they have limitations. Maybe this is a bit harsh, but for me, if I look at it through humor, so something happened recently. I moved and my mom, oh, I wonder if she's going to listen to this. My mom can get really critical about things. So she will move. So when she came to visit the first time, the walkthrough, and so she was going through the space and I said to her beforehand, I just know you can't help yourself in criticizing what comes up. And I brought it up. I wasn't triggered at that point. So I said it with lightness and humor. And so I wasn't there. My partner was there. And so I told him, hey, can you take a video? And I said this to her too. She was in the room. Hey, let's take a video of you going through the space and just your reaction to the space. And when he took video, she would be like, this is small. And she'd put her hands on her. And then she'd look at him and she'd cackle of, I can't help myself. I'm trying not to do it. And yet here it comes. And so being able to look at it with humor, being able to rewatch it all together. We actually rewatched it all together. And how many times she caught herself
Mm.
criticizing the space. And because I had that, I approached it with a lightheartedness and a humor of like, oh, this is something that you do. And even when you're trying not to do it, it just automatically comes up that I can approach that with more humor and it feels less like it's somehow a criticism about me.
Yeah. And it sounds like you, through that, invited her to approach it with humor as well. And then she
Right.
noticed when she was doing it. That's healing for the whole family. And it
Right.
really is, so much of this is generationally taught. So our parents learned it from their grandparent or their parents,
Mm-hmm.
and then their
Mm-hmm.
parents and their parents. And so I don't think I just love the idea of maybe there's some grace there that you can offer. These are
Yeah.
humans. They also have limitations. Um, I do think I get stuck in the trap of expecting a whole lot more from my parents than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if this is true too, that they also regress to their
Yeah.
either child selves or even just younger, oh, I see that you're doing the thing. My kid that would be a smart mouth, you're doing it. And they're maybe triggered in the same way. They're reacting to you like you're still a teenager. So you're both swept up in this old dynamic.
I want to talk about traditions. I love what you say about traditions, that they can be used actually as a way to control others. Tell me
Hmm.
about that, and basically, I guess, how to navigate whether you're going to take part in traditions or not.
Hmm. When we're adults, we have more power. That's one thing. Traditions are beautiful, are beautiful things. It makes us feel a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging. It helps mark time in a way that it's almost like a container of our lives of, okay, this is how life goes. It can be grounding in that way. Okay,
Mhm.
even when something horrible happens, we return to the tradition. That being said, sometimes what happens around tradition is guilt tripping. So the parent, they have this idea maybe of what they want holidays to look like. That's what it feels, that's what togetherness feels like. That's trying to recreate, okay, this is what Christmas feels like when our kids were kids. And
Mhm.
hey, things shift. I have my own family now. Sometimes, my brother-in-law is a chef, and there can be these expectations of like, you need to show up. And sometimes just the needs have shifted or the priorities have shifted. Hey, I actually have to work. Typically during holidays, maybe not Christmas, but for a lot of holidays, I'm working. And can people understand that we can break tradition, we can create our
Mhm.
own traditions. Hey, holidays can be on different days. And if there is a rigidity around that from the parents, then that just creates more conflict, and that's not necessarily his fault, right? It's
Right.
in they are mutually not wanting to or the parent in this case is not wanting to soften around what can traditions look like. Okay, Christmas morning, we usually have breakfast. Can we have breakfast on Boxing Day, which is the day after
Yeah.
Christmas for you Americans? Um, but I do think that being in our own families in adulthood, we get to create our own traditions. We get to say, what are the things that we do as a family that makes us feel like it honors, I don't know, maybe it's the time of year or just our togetherness as a family that feels warm and cozy for us rather than something that feels like it's done out of guilt or out of
Mhm.
obligation. I've heard somebody, this is another phrase that is not mine, but it was like tradition is guilt tripping from dead people
Oh my
because
gosh.
it's like, we've done this for generations. And then there's the pressure of you can't change it because that's how
Mhm.
it's always been done. So it can be really difficult to kind of break through that if you were in a family that's like very rigid about their traditions, their holidays.
How can you decide, the example you gave was like, okay, obviously someone has to work, they can't show up for the holiday. But if there's something that's bringing you, a lot of anxiety, it's a tradition maybe that's bringing you a lot of anxiety or distress, maybe that's how you decide not to take part in it. If it's just really not adding to your holiday, but adding a lot of negative emotions.
I think that's in exploring whether you go to the gathering at all. I think also thinking through the different traditions, right? So maybe something is we all do a toast and now I'm sober, and
Yeah.
there's this kind of pressure that, hey, we all have our wine together and we toast, we each speak. Maybe I don't want to speak. I don't drink anymore and I don't like the public speaking. It's uncomfortable. And maybe giving yourself the permission because maybe no one else will do it, but I can opt out. It's actually
Hmm.
completely fine. Not I can have a different drink in my hand and that they might guilt trip or they might, hey, are you not there's a sort of the underlying message that maybe, hey, you don't belong in the same way if you aren't following this tradition and being able to tolerate. They might feel that way. I'm still part of this family. I just don't want to do this one thing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that example. I was just talking to someone who was struggling with this coming up on the Thanksgiving holiday, literally last week. So I
Hmm.
love that you gave that example. I want to talk a little bit about your workshop. So tell me a little bit about the holiday boundaries workshop.
Yeah, so this is a workshop that I do every year-ish. There were some years during the pandemic that I didn't do it, but being able to, it's everything that we talked about today, creating that plan so that you are front loading boundaries beforehand, so that you have those phrases in your back pocket, so that you can think about, okay, what is a full body no versus a full body yes for me? Okay, yeah, I want to go to the gathering, but my capacity is just, I'm so burnt out and my body is saying no. How can I listen to that? And then thinking about what are the blocks to speaking for my needs.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is that guilt. Okay, being able to kind of create the plan for the actual holidays and then maybe making some notes about what are some larger pieces of work over time that maybe I take to a therapist or something that I'm just journaling about and being aware of when I fall into those old patterns.
Mm-hmm. What have you heard from people who've attended?
Folks
What's
who've
been
attended my workshop, it's so grounding, it's so affirming of, hey, what we talked about at the beginning. Uh, my needs, my boundaries, my capacity matters. For some folks, they don't have people in their lives that affirm that for them. So being in a space where people get it, where one thing that I do in the workshop is we do a relationship mapping. So you look at, so it's like self, intimates, kin, acquaintances, and then strangers. And then maybe for strange folks, sometimes it's like dead to me when you're
Mm-hmm.
way out there. And thinking through different family members or friends and where they sit on your map, because sometimes there is you get to decide how close people, what you share, how much time, what are your priorities in terms of who you spend time with. And having that map can be clarifying about, okay, what are my priorities? What do I want my relationships to look like? And that can be really grounding for folks.
Mm-hmm. This is just so intentional. I think that's maybe my favorite thing about it is how intentional all this work is. And that's a virtual workshop that anyone can sign up for. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
So
actually it's a recording. So it's a recording of the workshop that happened like 2 weeks ago. And I will for folks who do sign up, I am going to have another Q&A session. So it's like you watch the workshop and then there will be a Q&A session for folks who bought the replay.
okay, cool. I will put that in show notes. People can find it that way. And before you go, I want to ask you the last question that I ask everyone,
Okay,
which
here we
is
go.
I made this up like 7 years ago and I still ask it. It's a big question. What is the number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in
Mm.
between?
Ooh, more joy. More joy. The good, the bad, the in between. For me, this maybe speaks to my own work in life, but oh no, I want to keep it on topic. So I'm like,
It's okay
but
if you go off topic. Yeah.
if I go off topic, it's like remembering that you're going to die.
No, that's good. That's good.
Like remembering that you're going to die. I think it's something about being present, honoring your needs. Life is too short. So being able to bring a sense, for me, it brings a sense of lightness of like, hey, we're none of this in the end matters. And so all we have is now. So how do I stay present and experience what is in front of me and let the other people's, let the discomfort, other people's discomfort, other people's, I don't know, demands kind of fall away because in the end that's not that important.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The holiday for this holiday episode, holidays, and remember that you're gonna die. It's not that serious. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. I love the levity that it brings to life because life does feel so heavy and so hard. But I love that. That's a really great reminder. Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really have enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
I hope you loved this conversation as much as I did. And I really hope that it helps as you move forward throughout the month of December, taking part in holiday traditions with your family. And I hope it helps you set the boundaries and helps you stay grounded in who you know you are. If you would like to find the Holiday Boundaries Workshop, I do have that link in show notes. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.